declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Zaky Mallah.
Q&A airs at 9:05 p.m. on Monday nights on the renowned Australian ABC channel. By the early Tuesday following the airing of the episode with Zaky Mallah in question, ABC was in damage control, issuing a statement saying that it had been wrong to involve Mallah in the program. In attempting to explore important issues about the rights of citizens and the role of the government in fighting terrorism, the Q&A program made an error in judgment in allowing Zaky Mallah to join the audience and ask a question, the statement said. Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that it was wrong for Q&A to include Zaky Mallah in the audience. We, the affirmative team from Aberfoyle Park High School, are certain that the statement is true. To define the topic, that it was wrong, which according to the Oxford Dictionary refers to a thing being unsuitable, mistaken, incorrectly judged, and having the potential to do harm. For Q&A, as a panel discussion program involving a live audience produced and aired by the Australian Broadcasting Commission to allow Zaky Mallah, a known jihadist sympathiser with a prison record, to actively participate in the discussion. As first speaker tonight, I will elaborate upon the purpose of the Q&A, Mallah's position in society, and the awful mistake of giving voice to a criminal. Our second speaker, Alex, will elaborate upon the many ways Mallah's inclusion was wrong, and on the inappropriateness of the Q&A as Mallah's platform. Our third speaker, Emma, will be outlining the errors in the opposition's arguments before summarising our team's case. Firstly, let me explain the purpose of the Q&A in relation to the Australian democratic governing system. A democracy functions at its best when citizens live in an environment in which everyone feels safe and respected, with social values, attitudes and laws being openly discussed without aggression or intent to disrupt social stability. The ABC is seen as the voice of Australian society and should reflect Australian values, and Q&A is, according to the ABC website, all about democracy in action. Yet Mallah, quite obviously, has not reflected the values of a true democrat. As I will go on to explain, aggressive people with dangerous extremist views, along with those with criminal convictions, are not appropriate participants in discussion forums such as the Q&A. So, on to my second point, that Zaky Mallah was the wrong person to allow into the Q&A audience. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, Mallah was charged with possession of an illegal firearm and went on to record a video of himself threatening to kill security officials, which he sold to an undercover ASIO officer. Thus, in 2003, Mallah was the first Australian to be arrested under Australia's newly revised anti-terrorism laws. While some checks had been made on Mallah before granting him permission to ask a question on the Q&A, a Department of Commission's report found that his recent posts on social media had not been reviewed. Since the Q&A episode, Mallah's tweets from August 2014 have been called offensive and misogynistic by Q&A host Tony Jones. Had we known about the tweets, we would have rejected his participation, he said. Paul Kelly, the editor-at-large of the Australian newspaper and a late inclusion on the Q&A panel, later described this explanation for Mallah's inclusion on the Q&A as extraordinary. We're told that would have ruled him out of the program, he said, but the fact that he had been prosecuted for terrorist activities, the fact that he had admitted that he threatened Australian officials and wanted to kill them, the fact that he'd served time, that he had a weapons arsenal, that he was conducting a campaign to publicise jihad nonetheless, that's okay. Well, it's not okay, and we empathetically agree. This leads me to my third and final point. To include Mallah in the audience of Q&A means that his radical beliefs and ideas have the potential to be heard all across Australia and Asia, and were, in effect, validated because of the kudos and respect associated with the ABC and its productions. How can we allow a criminal to be validated in this way? Through the Q&A, Mallah was given an authoritative platform, despite his jihadist sympathies and radical ideas. In a response to Parliamentary Secretary Steve Trover, Mallah stated that the Liberals have just justified to many Australian Muslims in the communities tonight to leave and go to Syria and join ISIL because of ministers like him. Mallah was given a voice to address the vast audience. a platform where it could have been possible to negatively influence others to take a more radical view or action, and even to bring harm through further dismay or trauma to others who had already experienced the horror and fear brought about by ISIL. Such people would hardly have felt safe knowing that a terrorist sympathiser was sitting a few metres from them or being given validity on national television. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring your attention back to the charges placed upon Zaky Mallah in 2003. Mallah pleaded guilty and remained in jail for 2.5 years. Zaky Mallah is a convicted criminal. How can it be said that he should have been allowed? How can it be said that he should have been included in the audience of Q&A unless we are to accept the wrongful publication of Mallah's views? His views were condoned using the platform of Q&A. Take note of the fact that we live in a democracy, ladies and gentlemen, a fact that we should be very proud of. To accept that Mallah should have stood as part of the show encourages the notion that we accept his extremist and jihadist views as representative of our society's opinion. But we stand against this. Ladies and gentlemen, Zaky Mallah most certainly should not have been a part of the Q&A audience. We, like Zaky Mallah, are not terrorist sympathisers. Allowing Mallah on the ABC was wrong, unsuitable, incorrect, and most certainly a big mistake.
I will call upon the first negative speaker, Alex Carter.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen and chairman. The topic for this evening's debate is that it was wrong for the Q&A to include Zaky Mallah in the audience, a notion that we, the negative team, firmly believe to be false. We agree with the affirmative team's definition. Tonight, I will discuss the context of the matter, how Mallah was deliberately provoked by Parliamentary Secretary Chobo to elicit a response and freedom of speech in Australia. Owen will be conveying that the government has used this situation as a distraction, the previous Q&A guests have been controversial, and that Mallah has only exposed the truth. Xavier will rebut and sum up our points. Before I move on to my own points, I would first like to rebut some ideas outlined by the first affirmative speaker. She has stated that the tweets that Zaky put were unacceptable. And yes, they were. But increasingly in this online world, many people make errors of judgment with social media. Mallah has made positive comments also on social media and openly discouraged Australians to join ISIS. Interestingly, many Liberal politicians have been forced to apologise for inappropriate and even misogynistic tweets. Tony Abbott himself has been labelled a misogynist on more than one occasion, perhaps most notably in 2013, when describing Liberal candidate Fiona Scott's sex appeal as one of her major attributes. Former Prime Minister Julia Gillard has famously labelled Tony Abbott a misogynist for his sexist remarks. If so, making misogynistic comments means that you are no longer entitled to an opinion. Perhaps Tony Abbott should resign. This also is another one of the affirmative speaker's points, where she stated that Zaky was misogynist. Secondly, she also said that he was a convicted criminal. Yes, he was trialed and jailed for 2 years, but he was found not guilty. Why are we having this discussion about a convicted criminal if he wasn't actually, the crime he didn't commit? Like, there's no justification behind saying that it was wrong for him to be there because of his criminal acts if he didn't actually do anything wrong. Now on to my own points. Firstly, I would like to contextualise the issue. As we all know, Zaky Mallah is a Muslim man who was tried for terrorist offences in 2003 when he was a mere 18 years of age, having made a foolish, attention-seeking video, but was conclusively found not guilty. Being the first man charged under anti-terrorist laws in our nation, Mallah was monitored closely by ASIO for those years, and as he obviously is not in jail, he did therefore not stir the attention of the organisation. Actually, the Sydney Morning Herald reports that ASIO regularly consults with Mallah to ask about his input of Syria. Surely his right to speak on Q&A should not be questioned if ASIO thinks his opinion worthy of listening to. Furthermore, Mallah is openly controversial, and we in the red and black are not suggesting his actions have been beyond reproach. However, considering the experiences of this man and the topic of that particular Q&A episode, his right to be there and express an alternate opinion to the government is undeniable. Interestingly, friends, some media outlets that criticise Mallah have actually featured him. In fact, in the 10 years to June 2015, there have been 437 print and online stories, including 134 prior to his Q&A appearance, according to the media website newmatilda.com. Secondly, shouldn't we empathise with this young man who was manipulated and provoked by an ambitious and subjective MP Chiobo into having an emotive reaction? Mallah is an Australian-born, self-declared stirrer who was harshly imprisoned under the presumption of innocence. Obviously, his opinions of the government's treatment of Muslims are confronting, but in reality they represent the views of other Muslims living in Australia, as affirmed by counter-terrorism expert Dr. Anne Ali. She notes that his views are a valuable part of public discourse around radicalisation and recruitment to Islamic State. Was the ABC aware that he may respond in a volatile manner when provoked? Perhaps. However, it doesn't change the fact that his appearance has opened a conversation and indeed a media frenzy about a very real issue confronting our nation today. Finally, in Australia we have a right to freedom of speech, something that Prime Minister Tony Abbott and his government seems to have forgotten. Curiously, in 2010, Abbott said, "Australia does not need more regulation of the media." Although after Mallah's appearance, that is exactly what he called for. Let us not miss the irony here. The show is called Q&A, question and answer. Mallah posed a humble question to the panel. His presence was supported by the ABC and was obviously not considered too big of a blunder as they chose to rescreen that episode 2 nights later. Perhaps Abbott is so critical as Mallah highlighted some important inadequacies proposed in his government policy. In fact, the hypocritical Prime Minister's remarks can be used to justify the appearance. As Abbott states, the job of the government is to foster free speech, not to silence.
I will call upon the second affirmative speaker, Alexandra Hurden.
Prime Minister, have you started the recording?
Yes, yeah, it continues.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott had to ask, whose side are you on? Referring to the ABC on the topic of Mallah's jihadist sympathising views. Mr Abbott accused the ABC of effectively, and I quote, giving a platform to a convicted criminal and terrorist sympathiser. If the highest elected officer of our government can find his appearance at the Q&A to be wrong, it must reflect the views of the millions of citizens who elected him. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that it was wrong for Q&A to include Zaky Mallah in the audience. We, the affirmative team, wholeheartedly believe this to be true. Tonight I'll talk about the various ways in which his inclusion was wrong, the alternatives to being in the Q&A audience, and how Mallah was not a suitable representative. As our first speaker Muntz has already explained, Mallah was not fit to be in the audience, let alone be given a public platform to promulgate his extremist views due to his criminal history. It was a dismal oversight which displayed serious misjudgment on the part of the producers and management at ABC TV. However, before I go on to cover my key points, allow me to correct some of the misconceptions the negative team has attempted to impose upon you. Their first speaker said that Mallah was provoked by Stephen Chobo, a panellist on the Q&A programme. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the facts. We are not here to debate the ethics of Mallah's statement. We are here to discuss whether or not he should have been in the audience. And the fact stands that, had the police not made an error in their attempted arrest, he would still be in jail today. The fact still stands that Mallah expressed intent to murder security officials and purchased firearms for this purpose. And the fact still stands that, despite what the negative team claims, is that he provoked Chobo by asking the question in the first place. Mallah is not the victim here. They also stated, and I quote, he represents Muslims. This is simply untrue, as they agreed with our definition, wherein we define Mallah to be a jihadist sympathiser. Does this not contradict their argument? My first point is that I must emphasise that we define wrong, as stated by the Oxford Dictionary, to being a thing unsuitable, mistaken, or incorrectly judged and having the potential to do harm. In every sense of the word, Mallah's inclusion was unsuitable, mistaken, ill-judged, and potentially harmful. It was wrong in that it gave credibility to a person with a criminal record. It was wrong in that the voicing of his views provided him with a vast audience, among whom are individuals who could be negatively influenced or encouraged to take a more radical view or action themselves. It was wrong in that a company as distinguished and widely regarded as wise and responsible as the Australian Broadcasting Commission would allow someone with a criminal conviction to not only be present during this sort of discussion, but especially to give his extremist views a voice. It was wrong in good judgment and common sense, because they could have had him exercise his right to be heard by an online submission, as I'll mention in my next point. It was just plain wrong. My second point tonight is that Q&A's democracy in action does not need to take questions from people present while the show is being filmed live. Zaky Mallah simply could have had his say by tweeting or have been directing his submission online instead of physically being in the audience. As Jeremy Samut, a research fellow at the Centre for Independent Studies, said, the decision to have Mallah on the programme was an editorial judgment by which the ABC has seemingly backfired. Had he submitted a tweet, a video, or online question, the ABC could have monitored and carefully assessed what he was trying to convey, whilst retaining the notion of individuality, without it devolving into a disturbing and fiery debate between himself and the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Trade, Stephen Chobo. My third and final point is that Mallah himself was not a fit person to include the audience, due to a multitude of underlying factors. As our first speaker, Mansa, mentioned in her opening statement, the reasoning behind Zaky Mallah being in the audience, according to the ABC, was to discuss important issues about the rights of citizens and the role of the government in fighting terrorism. But surely if the Q&A team wanted to explore these sensitive topics, there were better people to choose, more suitable people, those with not both a history as shady as Mallah's and his tendencies to cross the line and
expressing his views, as evidenced by his intention to carry out a terrorist plot and tweets posted earlier in the year threatening sexual violence on 2 female journalists. As Brian McNair, Professor of Journalism, Media and Communications, wrote on the online academic website The Conversation, sometimes the balance between free expression and public offence is delicate. Sometimes that line gets crossed, and live TV is of course especially vulnerable to grandstanding by ideologues and narcissists. The day after the episode aired, Mallah tweeted the following: "Good to know I'm making headlines this morning. They don't call me Mr. Pot Stirrer for no reason. Good to know." This is exactly why including Mallah in the audience was an incorrect judgment in character. Mr. Pot Stirrer seemed proud of the controversy and media attention, rather than, despite what the negative team may say, having raised awareness towards Muslims. In conclusion, Zaky Mallah should undoubtedly not have been allowed on the Q&A, and we, the affirmative team, stand behind the topic given, as both logically and morally, it was wrong to include him in the audience. As Tony Jones himself, the host of Q&A, stated directly after Mallah's tirade, "That's a comment we're just going to rule out of order." A spokesman for the ABC reported that over 900 complaints had been received by the ABC in relation to Mallah, further indicative of the wrong decision the broadcaster made to include him in the audience. If the host, panellists, viewers, broadcasting network and government all found both Zaky Mallah and his comments to be out of place in Q&A, then how can the negative team possibly argue otherwise? Thank you.
I'll call upon the second negative speaker, Owen Selby.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen and chairman. Our topic of debate tonight is that it was wrong for Q&A to include Zaky Mallah in the audience. As the negative team, we obviously disagree with this statement. Before I get into my own points, I shall first rebut the affirmative team's false statements. Now, the affirmative first speaker has attempted to tell you that because Q&A is a democracy, then Mallah should not have been allowed on the show for his extremist views. However, ladies and gentlemen, this contradicts itself. It is a democracy. It should allow all types of freedom of speech, not one type of freedom of speech, which makes it a dictatorship. Ladies and gentlemen, Q&A is there for a debate. That is why it was also important for Mallah to actually be in the audience. Yes, the debate did get out of hand, but that was on faults of both sides, with Chobe telling me he should be out of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, if Mallah wasn't in the audience and simply sending a video recording to a tweet, that interesting debate, which garnered lots of attention and brought to light a serious problem with the new legislation, was important for Q&A as a whole. Also, they've attempted to call it, the second affirmative speaker has attempted to call him extremist. However, ladies and gentlemen, extremist would be joining up with ISIS, a group he has regularly said young Muslims should not go to. Ladies and gentlemen, he was there supporting a view, debating one of the government's new political laws, which is what Q&A is there to do. Not for the government putting on propaganda, but to say, is this the right thing for our country? Mallah was disagreeing with that, and he was right to voice his opinion. They also said that he was a danger for the people in the audience. However, ladies and gentlemen, they also said that it was a mistake for him to not be in prison. Ladies and gentlemen, are the affirmative team really going to tell me they know better than the court itself? If so, I suggest they go up and be lawyers right now, because they obviously know better than the trained professionals. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a reason we have this system, to make the right and wrong decisions. Maybe it was a mistake by the police to lock him up in the first place, not by the court to release him. Now, on to my own points. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, it must be pointed out that the most intense pressure directed towards the ABC for allowing Mallah on the show is being felt from the government, and in particular, Prime Minister Tony Abbott, in what feels just a little convenient. Whilst Abbott has openly criticised the ABC for allowing Mallah freedom of speech, a clear contradiction to his previous viewpoint on the subject, as eloquently presented by our first speaker, Alex, it is crucial to note that the whole scenario has been very useful to the Liberals, as it provides a distraction from regular parliamentary going-ons. Let's be honest, it's been a tough few months for Tony Abbott, with opposition leader Bill Shorten, currently Australian voters' choice for preferred PM, leading Tony Abbott by 5 points according to the latest election poll, as reported by The Australian. Mallah's appearance has actually drawn attention to this new legislation, which dictates that an Australian nationality is merely suspected of terrorism activities, but a single minister official, and not a court, decides if he is to be stripped of Australian citizenship, according to the Liberal Party website. This new law has garnered lots of criticism, and is the reason why Mallah was posting his own situation to the Q&A panel, so he can continue the criticism. If a minister had decided his fate, then Mallah would not be in the country right now, as Choba illustrated very clearly on the night. The government is essentially using Mallah as the extremist, who should have been deported, despite his frequent requests that Australians refrain from involving themselves in foreign conflict. Whilst the government has huffed and puffed about Mallah being on the show, there is no doubt that it has highlighted some of the flaws of this recent legislation, and in no way was a call to arms as they are trying to represent it. Secondly, and quite profoundly, friends, let us not forget that this is not the first time that Q&A has had such a controversial guest on their programme. In 2001, David Hicks, an Australian and former Muslim, had been captured and was accused of participating in training camps for terrorist group Al-Qaeda whilst he was in Afghanistan. Hicks was convicted for his apparent involvement with terrorism and was placed in Guantanamo Bay Detention Centre for 6 years. During his time there, Hicks was beaten whilst blindfolded, among other tortures, as was reported by ABC's Four Corners. Following trial in 2007, he was released in December of that year and returned to Australia. Hicks was a guest on Q&A in 2010, where he posed a question to John Howard, Prime Minister during Hicks' imprisonment. He asked a controversial and emotionally loaded question: "Do you believe that I was treated humanely?" As per Q&A's transcript of the episode, Howard's immediate response was, "Isn't it a great country that allows this kind of exchange to occur? This is not the sort of exchange that would occur in other countries and in dictatorships, and it ought to make all of us very proud that we live in a country that allows this sort of exchange." This is John Howard articulating exactly what Tony Abbott and the affirmative team are both refusing to admit. But by allowing controversial guests like David Hicks and Zaky Mallah into the audience, ABC is providing all Australians with a voice and the opportunity to express an opinion. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but that's the sort of Australia I want to live in. Not one where everyone has to look, think and act the same in order to be accepted by the government. In conclusion, we in the red and black obviously strongly attest that it was not a mistake to have Zaky Mallah in the audience of Q&A. Did he support the government's new legislation? No. Did he present a viewpoint held by many Australians? Yes. No talking about an issue doesn't mean it does not exist. As a country, we should not fear people saying things that offend, horrify or disgust us. To paraphrase poet John Milton, let truth and falsehood grapple. Truth is strong. Thank you.
and call upon the third affirmative speaker, Aberfoyle.
In attempting to explore important issues about the rights of citizens and the role of the government in fighting terrorism, the Q&A program made an error in judgment in allowing Zaky Mallah to join the audience and ask a question, says Richard Finelson, the director of ABC Television. Ladies and gentlemen, if the Australian government, the director of ABC and the director of the Q&A board themselves believe that allowing Mallah to speak was a mistake, how could they possibly argue that it wasn't? As we know, the topic for tonight's debate is that it was wrong for Q&A to include Zaky Mallah in the audience. This is entirely true. As my team has already told you in multiple ways, allowing Zaky Mallah into the Q&A audience was wrong. Before I sum up my team's case, I would like to correct everything the negative team has attempted to convey to you thus far. I would like to reinstate that our definition states that it was wrong, unsuitable and an incorrect judgment of the Q&A. A known jihadist sympathiser with a prison record, in no way a representative of Muslims, to participate in the discussion. To this, the negative team have agreed to, and effectively, to our side of the argument. Their first speaker attempted to rebut against our first speaker by saying that although the tweets were awful, Tony Abbott has also made disgusting tweets. Well, Tony Abbott's tweets were made in 2013, and he has apologised for those. Zaky Mallah's tweets were recent and unapologetic. He also claimed that he was found non-guilty, but that was mainly due to a lack of paperwork. If the police had not failed to obtain a Controlled Operations Authority certificate before his arrest, Zaky Mallah would be in prison right now. Their first speaker, Alex, mentioned that ASIO asks for his views on occasional cases. They're most likely asking for his jihadist views. They're asking for his views to try and combat the views of other jihadist and ISIS sympathisers out there. They also mentioned that there are approximately 924 articles written about Zaky Mallah, but only 124 of those were before his ridiculous and controversial argument on Q&A. They mentioned how Zaky Mallah was only imprisoned for 2.5 years due to other things, but he was imprisoned because he pled guilty. He would be in prison for a lot more time if said paperwork was delivered. They also mentioned that his presence was supported by the Q&A. How can that be true if the Q&A themselves said, made an error of judgment in allowing Zaky Mallah to join the audience and ask a question? His question was fine, right, that is correct, but his afterwords and arguments were unacceptable. The show's presenter has even said, we'll disregard that comment. Yes. The first negative speaker, Alex, said, and I quote, that his presence was supported by the ABC. When the ABC issued a statement the very next day stating that the Q&A program made an error in judgment. This completely contradicts their argument, especially as wrong, according to our definition, means incorrectly judged, which is exactly what the ABC agreed to have done. Our definition also states that he is a known jihadist sympathiser with a prison record. Ergo, he is clearly a criminal in illegal acts that our first affirmative speaker has already outlined, including a video threatening to kill security officers. Hence, Mallah is undeniably a criminal. Their second speaker, Owen, said, and I quote, yes, the debate did get out of hand. The second negative said that he is extremist, yet he is clearly a jihadist sympathiser, as stated in the definition, which the negative team have agreed to. He said that Mallah's performance was a distraction for the Liberals, but everything is a distraction. Kim Kardashian having a new baby was a distraction. Everything posted in the media is a distraction. They also mentioned how Trober, such as Mallah, were both speaking out of hand.
which is true. They were both speaking out of hand. Mallah's question in the beginning was a nice, innocent statement directed towards Trober, but afterwards, that was unacceptable. Their argumentative behaviour and disgusting things that were mentioned were unacceptable. He said, the second speaker, Owen, also said that it wasn't a call to arms. Mallah said that politicians like Trober encourage Muslims to join ISIS. And they also mentioned another speaker that went on to the Q&A, Higgs. Higgs asked a question, yet he didn't let it go out of hand. The ABC should allow voices, which is correct. Yet, as Alex has said, a different medium should have been used, such as a tweet or a video. The second negative also said that we should go up and argue with the court. All that we are saying is that the court was not given right evidence for correct judgments, including a Controlled Operations Authority certificate. Therefore, the court's judgment was not wrong, provided evidence given, but in a wider picture. Now to summarise my team's case. As the first speaker, Munzer, has already mentioned, the purpose of Q&A is to provide part of a voice of Australia. Mallah did not uphold the voice of Australia. He is aggressive and it was not appropriate for such a renowned show. She also mentioned how due to the fact that Mallah was a criminal, it was both inappropriate and an error of judgment. The Q&A host himself has said that had we known about the tweets, we would have rejected his participation. Munzer also said including Mallah means his beliefs and ideas become validated. How can we validate the views of a terrorist? This is unacceptable. Our second speaker, Alex, defined wrong and how thoroughly wrong it was for them to allow such an awful person onto their screen. She also mentioned how it would have made more sense to allow Mallah to talk in a different medium. Mallah himself said, "Good to know I'm making headlines this morning. They don't call me Mr. Pot-stirrer for nothing. It's good to know the ABC can allow a misogynistic megalomaniac to interrogate the panels."
I call upon the third negative speaker, Zaky Mallah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. As you're all well aware, the topic for our debate this evening is that the Q&A were wrong to include Zaky Mallah in their audience, a notion we in the Red and Black firmly oppose. Before I get into my arguments, I'd like to point out some flaws in the points put forward by the affirmative team. The affirmative's first speaker has stated that it was wrong for the Q&A to include Zaky Mallah simply because they have issued an apology saying it is so. While this is true, we as the negative team would like to call into the question the sincerity of this apology. The fact is, the ABC relies on government funding to survive, funding that in recent years has been significantly cut by the Liberal government. The Guardian reports that the funding to the ABC and SBS has been slashed by $308 million over 5 years. The apology on the ABC's part, directed at the Liberal government, was simply an act of self-preservation and nothing more, especially considering Malcolm Turnbull has accused the ABC of having some kind of political bargain with the Labour Party, and particularly in light of the fact that the episode was rerun 2 nights later. The first speaker on the affirmative side has also said that Mallah was a safety and security threat on the night. Well, following the episode on which Mallah was shown, Tony Jones, the host of Q&A, made a statement expressing that security and safety of all audience members is a key priority for the ABC. We in the red and black don't believe that Zaky Mallah did pose a safety and security threat in the audience, as when Cherba provoked him, he remained calm and did not violently react to his comments. Furthermore, after Zaky Mallah had spoken, the audience immediately applauded, conveying that they do agree with his comments made and did not consider him as a security threat. She also stated that giving a known criminal a voice is wrong. However, that is part of the freedom of speech. If we are to accept that in a democratic society all views must be accepted, that includes the views of criminals. Yes, and even though he was acquitted. The second speaker has said that there are more suitable people available for this role than Zaky Mallah in order to promote debate. However, she declined to include any examples and gave no substantiation for this assertion. What people, I ask? What people could do better than someone who has experienced these laws firsthand? She also stated that it was inappropriate as he has threatened to murder ASIO officials. As Alex said, ASIO now comes to him for information, showing that this transgression is very much forgiven, as he did not lay a finger on any ASIO official at all. The third affirmative speaker has called upon the disgusting behaviour, so-called disgusting behaviour during the episode as reason why he was an inappropriate choice. By that definition, Cherba himself also had some pretty questionable behaviour and should not have been seen on Q&A then as well. She also stated that because popular belief says it is wrong, that it certainly was. However, popular belief does not necessarily infer the truth. The truth can be something that not a lot of people believe. She stated that it was a call to arms for people to go and join ISIS. However, Mallah has gone on record stating, "I am not a supporter of ISIS. I hate ISIS. I was just making the point that Cherba's comments play into the justification many Muslims feel for joining ISIS." He was not telling people to go and join ISIS. He was saying that the Liberal government has given them a reason to go join it. Now on to my own points. Our first speaker, Alex, began by giving some context on the issue at hand, including the fact that Mallah has been misrepresented and has also appeared in the Q&A audience before with no furious debate surrounding his appearance. He stipulated that MP Stephen Chobo deliberately and consciously provoked Mallah into his controversial response and talked about the importance of freedom of speech in modern Australian society, particularly the role of the media, including the ABC, to uphold these values and present differing views on political matters at hand, including those of people who may not agree or who have done questionable things in their past. Our second speaker, Owen, explained how the current Australian government has inflated the controversy surrounding Mallah for their own benefit regarding this new legislation. As according to ABC Managing Director Mark Scott, not all parties to the conversation have seemed vested in pursuing rational discourse. He also made the comparison to other controversial guests featured on Q&A before, including David Hicks, and showed that these situations are nothing new to the ABC. He also spoke in regards to how it was not a wrong decision on the ABC's part to bring exposure to what is an important political matter by allowing Mallah in their audience. Combined with the fact that the decision to rerun the episode shows its value in allowing different opinions to be heard. The ABC, rather than sweeping it under the rug, chose to highlight this contemporary issue and bring it to the attention of the wider public, even if they didn't agree with it. Conclusively, ladies and gentlemen, the decision to have Zaky Mallah appear on Q&A was not a wrong one. On the contrary, it upheld the values of freedom of speech and allowed the public insight into what is actually an important Australian political matter. The controversy surrounding Mallah's appearance is no different to similar situations in the past, and the ABC gave a misrepresented man the chance to express his views in a free society. I ask you, what is wrong with that? Thank you.
Please wait while the adjudicators finalise the results.
Yeah, that's fine.